Chapter 5. Fighting a Bully. Ricky Hollister's lower lip quivered as he looked straight at the principal. "Mr. Russell, I didn't do it," he said. "I wasn't even near the drinking fountain today." The principal picked up his telephone and called Ricky's teacher. He asked her whether the boy had left the room that morning, except at recess time. "No, Mr. Russell." Then he inquired whether Ricky had come straight from the playground after recess. "Yes, he did." The principal hung up the phone and turned to Ricky. "I don't see when you would have had a chance to plug up the fountain," he said. "Stay here a moment and I'll call Alma." Mr. Russell telephoned Alma's teacher, and the girl was sent to the office. When she entered, he motioned her to a chair alongside Ricky. The principal told her she must be mistaken in blaming the boy for causing the small flood in the school. Alma seemed very nervous. She kept pulling at the trimming on her dress and looked down at the floor. Then she said, "Well, maybe it wasn't Ricky, but it must have been someone who looked like him." "Why did you make up this story, Alma?" Mr. Russell asked her severely. Alma burst into tears. "Joey Brill said Ricky did it," she wailed. "But I think Joey did it himself." Mr. Russell told her it was not fair to place blame on an innocent person. Then he sent her back to the classroom. After Alma had left, Mr. Russell told Ricky he was sorry, and the boy went back to his room feeling much better. A little later, Pete noted that Joey was called from their classroom to the principal's office. When Joey returned, he looked pretty sober. Besides, he had to stay after school an hour for his prank. On the way home, Pete told Pam what had happened. "Serves Joey right for telling Alma a fib to pass along and get Ricky into trouble," Pam declared. She and Pete expected Joey to be nice to the Hollisters after that, at least for a while. How surprised Pam was when at 4:30 he marched into their backyard, where she was playing with Zip. The boy had a mean, triumphant look on his face. Smirking, he walked up to her. "I just found out that you aren't president of the pet club after all," he said. "I'm the president, and I can prove it." "What do you mean?" Pam asked in amazement. "The ballots were counted and I won by 1 vote." "The ballots weren't counted right," Joey protested. "Your friend Donna doesn't know how to add." "How do you know?" Pam asked quickly. "Did you open Miss Nelson's desk and count them again?" Joey's face turned beet red. I, he stammered. "Of course not. I went around and asked different people how they voted. I had at least 15. Pam was stunned. Maybe Donna had made a mistake. How embarrassing. "I'll take charge of the first meeting," Joey announced, and walked off. Poor Pam. She wanted to cry, but held back the tears. She hurried into the house and dialed Miss Nelson's number. She heard the phone ring and ring, but no one answered. "Oh dear," Pam said. Then she brightened. If Miss Nelson was not at home, she must be feeling better and would be at school next day. Pam would go early and ask her. After Pam hung up, she ran to the kitchen, where her mother was preparing supper. When Mrs. Hollister heard the story, she put an arm around her daughter. "Don't feel too bad, dear, if you're not the president," she said. "If a mistake has been made and Joey was really elected, then he deserves the position." "I know, Mother," Pam said sadly, "but I don't see how Donna could have made such a mistake." Pam continued to worry about it as she set the table. In the living room, the younger children were watching the television weather news. The announcer at the local station stood before a big chart. In a moment, he pointed to Lower Canada and said it was growing cold in this area. "That's where Gram and Grandpa are," Ricky spoke up. "Oh boy, when we go up there, we'll sure have to wear warm clothes." "Listen," Holly commanded. "A long cold spell," the weatherman went on, "is expected to hit this part of the country in about a week. Residents of Shoreham and vicinity can look for extremely low temperatures and snow. The screen showed a picture of a man covered with icicles, and the children laughed. "Brr," said Holly, hunching her shoulders and wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm an icicle girl," Sue announced. "Look out, you'll melt by that radiator," Ricky teased. Pam took little interest in either the weather or the joking. She was still fretting over the outcome of the pet club election. Next morning, she was the first one up, the first to finish breakfast, and the first to start for school. "My goodness, you're full of energy today," Mrs. Hollister said as she kissed Pam goodbye. "Oh, Mother, I simply must find out whether Joey was right about the election," she said, and hurried off. Pam was at the school before the doors were opened. When Mr. Logan let the pupils in, she hurried to her room. Miss Nelson was not there yet. Pam, wondering whether her mother would be called to substitute again, went to her seat. But just before the bell rang, Miss Nelson appeared. How glad Pam was to see that the teacher seemed to be feeling all right. There was no time to talk to her, though, before lessons started. Pam waited patiently until recess time. She was just about to speak to the teacher when Joey Brill hurried into the room. Miss Nelson," he said excitedly, and began to talk quickly in low tones. The teacher pulled open her desk drawer and took out 2 piles of little papers. The pet club ballots. Pam could stand the suspense no longer. She hurried to the front of the room. "Miss Nelson, Joey says that I'm not president of the club. Is that right?" With this, Joey picked up one of the piles. "These have my name on them," he said. "Look yourself, Pam, and count them." Her hands trembling, Pam picked up the pile, looked at the name on each slip, and counted them. 15 votes for Joey Brill. That meant Pam had only had 10 instead of 13. "Ha-ha, I told you so," Joey said as he put the piles back in the desk, and then left the room. Tears welled into Pam's eyes. She bit her lip and returned to her seat, where she buried her head in her arms. Miss Nelson walked over to Pam and put her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "We all make mistakes. I dare say Donna will feel even worse than you do." Pam admitted this, but she was so upset that she did not even go out for recess. When lunchtime came, she could hardly eat, although her family tried to cheer her up. Word spread around the school quickly that Donna had counted the ballots wrong, and that Joey Brill was president of the pet club. "I feel terrible," Donna said when she met Pam in the corridor 10 minutes before the bell for afternoon classes rang. Pam could see that the girl had been crying. Just then, Pete Hollister ran up to them. "I think Joey's up to one of his tricks," he said. "I watched very closely when Donna was counting the votes. I'm sure you won, Pam. Did Miss Nelson count your votes again?" Pam did not think Miss Nelson had, but why was this necessary? There were only 25 altogether. Pam and Donna went to their rooms, but Pete hurried to the schoolyard to play for a few minutes before the afternoon session started. The first person he met outside was Joey Brill. Yeah, Joey taunted. "Your sister got Donna to cheat with the ballots, but Pam didn't win the election." Pete was furious. "You take that back," he demanded. "If there was a mistake in the counting, it was not because my sister is a cheat." Yes, she is, she's a meanie," Joey insisted. Pete clenched his fists. "Take that back." "I will not." With a quick jab, Pete hit Joey on the nose. The bigger boy teetered back, regained his balance, and came at Pete with both fists flying. For a few moments there was a melee of arms and legs. The boys fell to the ground, their arms wrapped about each other. First Pete was on top, then Joey rolled over and gained the advantage. The other children in the schoolyard, including Ricky Hollister, gathered around. Pete's jacket was torn open and the cuff of Joey's shirt was ripped. The fighters' hair was mussed and their faces dirty as they rolled over and over. "You take that back," Pete said, panting. "I never will," Joey replied, scrambling to his feet. Although Pete was smaller than his rival, he was quicker. With a sudden movement, he got a headlock on Joey, and with a quick twist threw the boy to the ground. Then Pete flung himself on top of Joey, kneeling on Joey's arms with both knees. The larger boy could not move. Pete looked down into Joey's face. "Have you had enough?" he asked. Joey winced and nodded. "Do you take back what you said about Pam?" "Yes." "Then say she's not a cheat," Pete insisted. "All right, she's not a cheat," Joey said. Just then 3 boys came running from the school building and elbowed their way through the ring of children. Pete recognized them immediately as friends of Joey's. The beaten boy saw them too. "Hey fellas, help me!" he shouted. The boys dashed toward Pete Hollister, who quickly jumped off Joey and turned to meet the rush. Joey hit him from behind, as the other 3 flung themselves at Pete.